currently we have the capability of being able to log in, right, as a particular user, log out, and then log in as someone else, right, as Alice. Let's add now the capability of being able to register as a brand new user. Right now it's not doing anything, right? It's ignoring this, right? And when we register, it just shows an existing user of Alice, right? So let's fix that. Let's log out. Let's go back to register. Let's add a brand new controller to the register page. Yes? Let's do that. All right, so currently the register page doesn't have a controller. That doesn't have a controller at all, right? So let's create a brand new controller for the register page. So it'll be register.controller.client.js. It's a brand new controller. Like all our JavaScript code, they are all going to be hosted inside of an IFI. We're going to use the Angular module to retrieve our web app. And on that, we're going to declare a brand new controller, and we're going to call the register controller, implemented in a function of the same name. Yes? Okay. Here's the function. No scope. All right, so the very first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to declare the model. We're going to grab the instance. We're going to declare an empty init and init. Okay, so this should be the very first 4 lines of code that you should write for every single controller, right? And then you go in and fill in the rest. Okay. So in the register controller, we're going to have one event handler, right? If we click on the register button, correct? And following our best practices, we're going to declare all our event handlers at the top. Right, so register user, and we're going to implement it down here. Yes? And just to make sure that we are getting here, we're just going to console log that we got it here, right? So let's test to see that indeed we can hit this. Yes?
Is the module name WAN app?
Oh, thank you. Yes. Yep. Okay, so let's. I just created this brand new controller. I want to make sure that I load it into my index page. It's register controller. There it is. So I loaded it. And now I need to also declare it in my config. I'm going to say that for this register URL, the controller for that template is going to be the register controller. And the template can refer to it as model. Right? So from within my templates, my register view, so from my register view, right, when I click on the register button, right now it's hard-coded, right, to navigate to the profile page. Yes? Instead, right, I'm going to notify the controller that this button has been clicked and that the register function should be called register user. And we need to pass it the user that lives in this view with the data of the username that they want and the 2 passwords, right? So the template needs to declare those variables. So let's declare those variables. So ng model username. Well, it could be user.username. Let's declare this is a password and the password here, password 2. Okay? And when we register user, we pass in the user object. This user object, notice that it only lives in this page. Yes? Notice that I have not tied it to the model. I did not do model.user. Right? So even though it's being declared on the scope, since I'm not using the scope, right, it's as if the controller doesn't see it. Right? Obviously, it sees it if it wants through the scope, right? But we're not using the scope. And the only way that the controller sees it is because I pass it as argument. Yes? Right, that's a good thing. That's a good practice, right? That data should flow only when I explicitly pass it to you, right? Data should never flow implicitly. Okay? We don't want go-tos here, right? We don't want spaghetti code that, I jiggle something here and all of a sudden something over there starts moving, right? I want to make sure that if that happens, it's because I intended that to happen, not as a side effect. Yes, we want our scopes to be narrow. We want the communication between the modules to be explicit, right, through a very well-defined API. Yes, right. And that was one of the reasons why we decided to go with model in the first place, right? We didn't want scope to be muddled with these hierarchies of multiple controllers telling us what the values might be. Yeah. We want to have a very explicit understanding of who's setting these values. All right, so we're passing it. So on the controller, in the register function, we are going to receive the user object right here. Register controller, and we're going to display also their user object that we're passing. So let's try it. Let's see. Let's refresh. We have an error. Register controller. Register user is not defined. Register user. Oh, sorry. Register user. Register user. I told you how much I hate computers. There it is. Okay, so let's try it. So if I go to the console and I type something and I register, there it is. Right? It calls the register controller or register function, and it types the information that we passed in as arguments. Yes. And what would we really would like to happen here? We would like to add this brand new user, right, to the list of users that already exists. No. Right, so let's do that. But we don't have access to that over here. The only way that we have access, or should have access, only through the service. The service is the sole point of entry of manipulating the data. So we would like to do something like, user service dot register user, right? And we want to pass in the user object, something like that, right? And this would create or send us back the user object, modified a little bit. For instance, the user, as it comes from the template, it doesn't have an ID, right? But once we store in the database, right, presumably it's going to come back with a unique identifier, a primary key that uniquely identifies the user. So presumably the service is going to do that, right? It's going to go out to the server, it's going to go out to the database is going to come back, and it'll have a unique identifier, right? We don't have that yet, so we're going to fake it. So let's do that. Let's implement the register user code here in the service. We don't have that. First of all, don't forget to declare the user service there, that we want the user service to be passed to us. Let's implement register user in the user service client. There it is. So it's going to be a brand new API implemented in a function of the same name. It's going to receive the user instance that comes from the template. Yes. We're going to add an ID to it. Typically, this would be done by the database, right? The database would do this, right? Add the primary key, but we don't have that yet, so we're going to fake that. What we're going to do is that we're going to create a timestamp, right? The current date gets time. That's a number. That's the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970, or something like that, right? We're going to convert it into a string because all our IDs are strings. So concatenating an empty string becomes a string. Now that we have it, we have the array right here. We can say users.push this brand new user. So we've added it to the array, and we're going to return user. Okay, which is the same exact user, but added the ID. Yes. Again, this is all going to move to the database at some point, right? But not just yet. So there it is. So we have the control return with the user, and then we can maybe display the user. We can do console log the brand new user. Okay, so let's try that. So if we just type some bogus stuff and register, there's our brand new user with an ID, right? And a unique identifier. If we just keep clicking, right, the user comes back with a complete different ID every time we register. Make sense? And presumably they are in the array, right? They're now in the array. Obviously, you might want to do some validation, right? You can't register somebody that has the same username, right? You want to make sure that the passwords match and things like that, right? So do some validation before doing the registration. But I'll leave that up to you. I'm just implementing the happy path here, right? If the user doesn't exist, let's add them. If it's successful, we should go to their profile, right? To their profile. So we could just navigate to the profile using the location service. We're going to go to the URL profile followed by the ID of our brand new user. Okay, right. So that if I register Fred, there's Fred. Okay, just created Fred. If I log out, I should be able to log in as Fred. I can log in as Fred. Okay, we just registered Fred, right? If I log out and I try to register, log in as Dan, notice that Dan doesn't exist, right? But if I register as Dan and register, and then I log out and I then log in as Dan, I can log in as Dan, right? So our registration seems to be working, right? It's just adding to that array. The profile just uses the ID to look up on the same array we just pushed onto, right? So it's going to find that brand new user, and it just displays it. That make sense? So register, a very simple implementation of registration. Obviously, it doesn't have any of the validation, right? Any of the error messaging that you might want to display there. For instance, one of the things you might want to do here is check to see if the username exists first, right? Check if that username exists. So, for instance, you might look up the user. You might say var user. Maybe you do a user service. Find user by username. Meaning, is there a user who has that username? Okay. And if no user, well, this might be underscore. If there is no user with that username, then we do this. Right? If there is no user, then we register you. Otherwise, we show some error message. Yes? Okay. Something like else model.error.user already exists. Right? And somewhere in the register page, you might have a div with an alert and alert danger that shows the model.error, and we only display this if there is a model error. Yes? Okay. So that if I try that and do it again, and I log out, and I try to register with Alice, right? It gives me an error. Oh, we never implemented find user by username, right? So there should be a find user by username, and we're going to pass in user.username. And in the service, We can add yet another API that finds user by username, which is very similar to this one. So let's copy this. So find user by username looks very similar to this. Look, here's the username. So it's iterating and it's comparing the username compared to the username. It finds it, it returns that user, right? Otherwise returns null. So let's see if we do Bob. It says user already exists, right? If I try to register as Dan, it registers as Dan. Yes, right? But certainly you can add many more validation here. All right, so I think I'm going to leave it here with users. One of the things that definitely you'll need to add to this is update user. Update user. Oops. And I'll leave that up to you. Update user. I think it should take as arguments the user ID of the user that you want to update, and then the brand new values that you want to set, right? So this might look something like find user by ID. It look something like this. Iterate over the users. If it finds the user, then update. This is equal to user, something like that, right? And return. Yes, something like that. I don't know. But that would be invoked from the controller, right? From the profile controller. You would have update user, and the update user would have the user object that comes in here, and it would call user service dot update user, and presumably it's the user and the ID of that user plus the user object. Yes? But I'm going to leave it up to you, right, to finish up on your own. It's almost done, right? So let's